Diego Lagumarcino, center in a 2015 photograph, was indicted Tuesday on charges that he played a role in the death of an Argentine prosecutor investigating a possible cover-up related to a 1994 bombing in Buenos Aires. Rodrigo Abt, Associated Press, Buenos Aires. A federal judge in Argentina on Tuesday indicted a computer expert on charges that he acted as an accomplice in the January 2015 death of the prosecutor Alberto Nisman. It is the first time a judge has formally called the politically fraught case, which remains unsolved, a homicide. In the indictment, Judge Julian Ercolini contended that the expert, Diego Lagumarcino, lent Mr. Nisman, his boss, the gun that was used to kill him as part of a conspiracy to create the impression that the prosecutor had committed suicide. But the court filing does not shed significant new light on the mysterious death of Mr. Nisman, who was leading an investigation into the 1994 bombing of a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires that killed 85 people. Shortly before he died, Mr. Nisman accused Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, then the president, and other top officials of covering up Iran's possible involvement in the bombing, the deadliest terrorist attack in Argentina's history. Judge Ercolini also indicted 4 of Mr. Nisman's bodyguards, Ruben Benitez, Nestor Duran, Armando Niz and Luis, on charges that they failed to fulfill the duties of a public servant and took part in the cover-up. Judge Ercolini accused the bodyguards of negligence for allowing the weapon to enter Mr. Nisman's apartment. He also faulted them for not detecting the shooting when it happened, which the judge said allowed the culprits to leave the scene undetected and delayed the discovery of the body. He ordered Mr. Lagumarcino to remain under electronic monitoring pending trial and froze his assets and bank accounts. Mr. Lagumarcino acknowledged shortly after the prosecutor's death that the bullet that killed Mr. Nisman, who was shot in the head, came from a handgun he owned. But he has consistently said that Mr. Nisman asked to borrow the weapon after receiving threats against him and his daughters. Mr. Lagumarcino, who learned of the indictment while he was being interviewed on live television, insisted that he was innocent. Alberto Nisman ruined my life, Mr. Lagumarcino said in a radio interview shortly before Judge Ercolini's indictment was made public. He had no idea he would be putting me in the mess that he did. Alberto Nisman speaking to journalists in Buenos Aires in 2013. Nisman, a prosecutor, was found dead in 2015 as he was leading an investigation into the 1994 bombing. Natasha Pisarenko, Associated Press. Mr. Lagumarcino said the courts should judge him for lending Mr. Nisman a gun if I committed a crime, but he insisted that I have nothing to do with the rest. In the 656-page indictment, Judge Ercolini noted that Nisman was killed with Diego Lagumarcino's weapon and, at the same time, he was the last person who entered the prosecutor's apartment. Judge Ercolini added that in the wake of Mr. Nisman's death there were numerous events that led officials to publicly push the idea of suicide, contributing to an almost unambiguous public certainty that Nisman had taken his own life. Judge Ercolini acknowledged that while he was accusing Mr. Lagumarcino of involvement in the homicide, the actual perpetrators remain unknown. In his accusation, Judge Ercolini cast blame on officials from the government of Mrs. Kirchner, who, along with friendly media outlets, promoted the theory that Mr. Nisman committed suicide. The death of prosecutor Nisman was not a suicide and was produced by third parties in an unintentional manner, Judge Ercolini asserted. Mr. Nisman was found dead in his bathroom with a gunshot wound to the head hours before he was scheduled to testify at a congressional hearing about his accusation that Mrs. Kirchner and several members of her administration conspired with Iran to cover up Iran's possible involvement in the bombing of the Jewish community center. Judge Ercolini's indictment follows the release in September of a report by forensic experts who concluded that Mr. Nisman had been murdered. That finding contradicted the assessment of another team of experts who determined that Mr. Nisman had most likely killed himself. Nisman's accusation against Mrs. Kirchner and other top officials in her administration has received renewed attention since her party lost the presidency in 2015. President Mauricio Macri has said he believes that Mr. Nisman was murdered. A separate criminal investigation into the bombing is continuing. Mrs. Kirchner, who was recently sworn in as a senator, was charged with treason this month in connection with the bombing case. An appeals court recently ruled that the treason charge was not warranted, but it allowed the indictment against her and other officials to proceed. As a senator, Mrs. Kirchner enjoys immunity from detention, which can be stripped only with the approval of 2/3 of the senators present at the time of the vote.